Scholars have speculated that Duncanson's use of rivers in his work refers to subconsciously evoked metaphors for passage to freedom. The name of this painting is called Valley Pasture 1857. This is perhaps one of my favorite paintings by Duncanson. It's absolutely exquisite. Once more, we see that beautiful sky with wonderful colors, lavenders, blues, cream colors that's reflected also in the landscape. Look at those beautiful mountains, and then the boulders, again, the trees, the water, and then those little small images of animals. And again, if you look very carefully, you can see people, you can see houses. Again, houses, peoples, animals, those aren't important. The important thing here is a spiritual aspect of the environment, right? The feeling of freedom in this environment. Let's move on. Now, according to Sharon F. Patterson in African American Art, an incredible textbook, she says, and I quote, "Viewing Duncanson's landscapes as escapist images can reveal a political subtext within his paintings." The name of this painting is called Western Forest. It's from 1857. And when you look at this particular painting, again, look at the beautiful details of the wood, of the trees, of the dying dead trees along with the living trees, and then look at that sky. And when you look at his paintings, the one thing you want to pay attention to is that foreground. Look at that foreground, which is the where you see the trees, you see the water, and if you look very closely, you can perhaps make out people or certain items. But the other part of his paintings, in this very incredible vertical painting here, is the fact that you have that foreground, you have the middle ground, we have a couple little waterfalls there, and then if you look further back into his paintings in what we call the background, he again has that very kind of aerial kind of atmosphere, very soft kind of film or smokiness. Again, that gives depth to that particular painting. This landscape is an excellent example of Duncanson's early work. It's a little naive, it's a little idealistic. This is called Landscape with Family by late 1858. And again, if you didn't know that there was a family there, you would really struggle to find it after you've looked at everything else. For instance, again, in that foreground, you see the tree, right? You see the interesting things about his foregrounds is that they shepherd you into the painting. There's a certain kind of drama that he has with the sky, once again, right? And then notice that his paintings are very similar. He has a body of water, right? He has rocks. He has an expansive sky. And then there's these trees that, again, they're kind of beautiful trees. They're individual. And that's what I'm always looking for, like the individuality of the tree. In this particular painting, the idealism that we get is the light, right? And when you think of light in paintings, and especially at this period, think of it from a Christian perspective. The light is God. The name of this painting is called Landscape with Rainbow and this is from 1859. The great outdoors, when you think about it, is a kind of freedom. The magnificent beauty of nature was not something that required white guidance or permission to embrace. The country fields are for everyone. So again, let's think about the time. It's antebellum time. Again, as I said to you, the abolitionists are talking about ending slavery, right? The evils of slavery, right? And then you have free black, as well as enslaved black people, right? And so the only place they could possibly be free is in nature. just walking through nature or riding through nature or being able to get away from their enslaved environment for whatever reason and go out in nature. And so nature now becomes this place of salvage. It becomes this place that you can lay your burdens down in a way, right? This is a little different kind of landscape than we have seen previously. It's still that horizontal type of landscape. We notice that he has cows in this one, and then again there's some people. Looks like maybe it looks like it might be a male and a female and a dog, right? But in this one it's a little bit more jovial, right? There's a rainbow. The clouds are little pink, puffy little shapes in the center of the background, right? Again, we have that atmosphere in the background, that beautiful kind of pale pinkish bluish kind of atmosphere in the background. In the foreground, we have wonderful grass and trees that are leading you into it. So when you see something like this, right, you look at something like this, and if you think about, if you can put yourself in the place of someone who's being trapped into slavery, right? If you get an opportunity to go and see this, you just have a sense of freedom, right? The air is free, the land is free, the trees are free. You can sit down on the surface of the ground. You can sit down on the trees, you can sit down on the rocks. They're free. You can smell them, you can breathe. Freedom. The name of this painting is called Robin the Eagle Nest from 1859. This is another recently discovered painting. And apparently it hung in the same house for generations. And I guess at some point, who knows if the family actually knew who the artist is. However, the painting sold for $105,000. And I would say to you, this is about 10 years ago. So this painting is probably more than what it fetched at the auction. However, look at this painting. It's a lot different than what we've seen. I think it's a painting that needs to be cleaned, personally. When we look at the sky, we can just look at the sky and we can see some of those kind of peachy, kind of yellowish, kind of bluish, kind of purplish colors, but they look a little dingy. And to me, the whole painting looks a little dingy, but this is how it has been presented, and for whatever reason, it has not been cleaned. We can also get an idea of kind of when, even though it has 1859, we can kind of get an idea of when this painting was created, because, the dates doesn't necessarily mean that's when the painting was created. I would say to you, this is one of his earlier landscapes, and just looking at the height of the trees next with the rocks, they're kind of competing with each other. And normally with his paintings, there's a separation. There's a place for your eyes to rest, to go from one form to the other. The calm, cloudy blue sky and gentle sweep of the valley around Lake Pepin, Minnesota, was far removed from the turmoil of the Civil War in 1862. Duncanson was, as I said, was a free African American, and he was living a few miles from the Confederate border. By the fall of 1862, the tension of the Civil War forced him to leave town on a sketching trip to Upper Mississippi through Minnesota into Canada, where he gained a wide following and influenced Canadian artists to paint landscapes. Now, according to the emergence of the African American artists, they stated, and I quote, "The Canadian art community eagerly received him, and he immediately became integral to the local art culture. Although he intended to stop only briefly, he stayed much longer than he anticipated, living in Montreal for 2 years from 1863 to 1865. Subsequently, several young Canadian artists emerged whose focus was on the landscape, was directly influenced by Duncanson," end of quote. So Duncanson, at this time, pursued a more realistic rendering of landscape views and tried to move away from that sort of imaginary composition, that fantastic kind of subject matter that we have seen. This particular painting is called View of Lake Pepin, Minnesota, 1862. So, man, this was made in 1862. He leaves in 1862. We know that the Civil War really happens around 1861. So if it's not, if they're not fighting in his particular area that he lived at, I think one of the things you need to think about when you're looking at this painting and you're thinking about 1862 and you're thinking about Duncanson, who takes a trip, right? Who goes on a trip, right? In between, in 1862, he goes on a trip when he makes his painting, a sketching trip to Canada, and basically he's leaving the area, right? I can imagine the tension that he was under, as an artist, right? As a black man, as an artist, and being on the border, right? And so I find it fascinating that he says, I'm going to go on a trip, right? A sketching trip. And then he goes and he sees this. He sees this land. He sees this sky. He sees all of these possibilities for the future, right? Right. Again, now, if we think of the landscape as a place of freedom, he sees this as that possibility. Notice in this particular painting from 1862, there's not a lot of trees, right? So he's closer to the water. And water is in all of his paintings, right? And for those of us who like water and like like bodies of water, it's as if this particular painting is centered around someplace else, right? It feels like he's traveling. It feels like he's walking over a hill and he looks down and sees this expansive landscape with the water, right? And either he's going over the hills or maybe he's taking some of that water, taking a boat on that water, right? But that water has a sense of cleansing. It has a sense of saving. It has a sense of moving. A lot of people go to the water to, as they say, to lay their burdens down. And I'm saying to you that this is perhaps what he was doing. Again, he is leaving in the middle of the Civil War. Or I should say the beginning. But if this is 1862, 1863, he leaves, and he goes to Canada, he's escaping. And I find it interesting that he didn't just say, hey, look, I'm leaving. And I wonder, well, why didn't he just say, look, I can't paint here, I'm going? Well, let's think about the time. I don't think this is a time that a black man who's a painter can just say, hey, look, you know what? I'm not going to deal with this whole Civil War thing. I'm just going to go on and paint. No, you're right. He has to sneak out of town on a sketching trip. And I'm saying sneak out of town on a sketching trip because most people are concerned about this Civil War, this internal fighting. Let me move on. During his sketching trip, he captured this beautiful view of the falls on Minnesota River near Manakota. The Dakota word for Minnepaw means water falling twice, refers to the twin waterfalls. A traditionally dressed Native American is at the foot of the foreground waterfall. It's perhaps a reference to Longfellow's Hiawatha, a famous poem set in the area. On the surface, the poem is about the vanishing Native American race, but the abolitionists also embraced it as a symbol of the plight of the African American, as both races suffered under the control of the European Americans. The name of this painting is Minnelah Falls, Minnesota, is 1862. You can see that even though he's supposed to be getting away from that sort of fantasy kind of painting, this is 1862. And so was the last painting from 1862. You can see that he flops back and forth. And I'm thinking that he's probably stressed. He is aware that, again, he is escaping the situation. And so I'm thinking that it's probably each day that he's painting and sketching, it is probably different, right? He's going back and forth in terms of his skill level. And I say that because when you look at this it has some of that fantasy kind of quality. Look at the trees. They're very similar. They're similar in the color. They're similar in shapes. And then we look in the background, we don't see that sky. We just see trees. So it gives us the feeling that there's a forest, but it's not, it doesn't have the same kind of grace that his other paintings have. And so again, I think you just think about the time period and think about the conflict that this artist must be feeling. Duncanson worked for prominent abolitionists with great success in Montreal and in London. He made this painting. Here's another painting from 1862. This is called Maiden's Rock, Lake Pepin. And again, if you were able to show all of these paintings from 1862, I think that they would have a lot of similarity, but there would be quite a bit of differences in terms of the feeling that you got from the painting. And it had to do with, as I said, where the artist was mentally. So for instance, look at the water here, right? This is the first time we even get a close-up view of the water. There, the foreground is the water. It looks like rain or something is dropping in the water. The water is moving. It's a little rough, right? In the foreground. We've not seen that before. Usually there's land, right? And so now we as the viewer are on the water as if we are in the boat. And we have the trip. We know what's going on as if we're leaving. And notice that little boat, that little sailboat. Small. That little sailboat, it's tiny. It's insignificant. Again, this painting is about the vastness of nature, the beauty of nature, the light, right? Look at those hills and how they differ. Those gentle slopes, as my friend called them. That sky. Look at how the sky moves them back. So the whole thing moves us in the back. It's really a beautiful traditional landscape and absolutely exquisite colors. J.D. Kittner, from The Emergence of the African American Artist, wrote, and I quote, he says, "As the war waged on in 1863, the bleak prospect for peace and the deteriorating racial situation worried the artist. Duncanson intended only to pass through Canada on his way to Europe, where he planned to tour his paintings. So in 1863, he returns to Europe to escape the extreme racism brought on by the Civil War. In Europe, he becomes the darling of the aristocrats, hanging out with poet laureates like Alfred Lord Tennyson and the Duke and Duchess of Sutherland and Scotland. He made this painting in 1863. He's in Canada. It's called On the St. Anne's, East Canada. Totally different, right? This is totally different. Look at the saturation of that color, right? Look at those trees. Look at the water on the rocks. It's like a totally different artist. The only similarities that we have is kind of the sky, right? It has similar colors. But the interesting thing to me about his sky is that everything is isolated. The clouds are isolated. The color of the sky is isolated. And that kind of pinkish, lavender kind of color in the back is kind of isolated. And he doesn't have any of those types of, we call those, by the way, tint colors in his landscape. Everything looks as if it's just, all the colors looks like they just got squeezed out of the tube. So I think he's just going back and forth, right? I think he's experimenting. He's playing with his colors. And also we have to, like I said, take in consideration where he's coming from, the fact that he's dealing with racism, the fact that his country people are fighting each other, right? There's a war between the South and the North. The name of this, and I'm sorry, it's a little out of focus, is called Meeting by the River. This is 1864. So we know he's not in the U.S. in 1864. We know that he is probably somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Canada at this particular time. And we see some similarities in his style. He goes back to that kind of open landscape. He has that body of water, but he goes back he goes back and uses sort of the same compositional kind of devices, right? in this case, it feels as if we, as the viewer, and you always want to put yourself in the painting if the artist allows. But this is as if we are in the background on a hill or something, looking around at the landscape. It's a certain kind of day. All of the trees are to the left. And they're on the same side as these two people who are meeting at the river. And we need to think about that, meeting at the river. That makes sense at that particular time. If there is some sort of discourse going on in one part of the world, it's affecting the other world. And maybe, who knows, maybe it has something to do with that type of discourse, the fact that they're meeting at the river. Or this entire piece could have been something, this entire painting could have been a painting that he created from memory. Right, or from bits and pieces. So Duncanson's luminous paintings falls within a type of exotic landscape that was practiced by the Hudson River School landscape artists such as Thomas Cole, Frederick Church, or Martin Johnson Head, Todd Smith, and Dominique Vassar. The name of this painting is called Waterfall on Mount Morcy, and this is 1864. And again, it has that sort of exotic feel. We could say he's probably still in Canada, and Canada has different lights. Each part of the country, even each part of our country has different light. So the light, so the light we see is different here. But I also would say to you that his feeling is different. It's intense. It's like when you look at everything, everything is in focus. And with this painting, as well as the other ones that we've seen that we know when he's in Canada, it's like, again, it's as if the colors just came out of the tube. There's a certain kind of intensity that he has. Everything has to be in focus. Everything has to be, his waterfall in this one is much better, I have to say. It's much better than what we saw in the twin waterfalls and in the other paintings where they were dark, right, and gloomy, right? That's when he's traveling. Now he's set. He's a professor. He's getting all of the accolades that he wants. Maybe one of the issues is that he didn't have the type of paint he needed, and now he's in Canada and he has access. Who knows? He also did watercolors, and this is one of his watercolor. I'm assuming it's a watercolor study that he made. It's a beautiful watercolor. This is just called Mount Royal, and this is 1864. So we see that he continues to go out in nature, right? He continues to go out in nature. He continues to study. But again, when you're looking at these paintings, think about the time, think about the situation, think about now he has escaped his country. He has gotten the accolade that he needs as an artist, as an instructor, and obviously he has the tools that he needs because his paintings are bright and he's feeling better. He's feeling better mentally. And so we see that in this particular painting. It's beautiful. That's a beautiful, beautiful tree that we see in the foreground, right? And then the trees in the background, they're all individual. So it's like you need to, as an artist, sit and wait and think about it and feel a certain way in order to get the type of imagery that you want. And at this point, I could say to you that he is doing well in his life. He is happy. He's probably even fat. The name of this painting is called Mount Oxford. Again, this is from 1864, and look at those colors. He still has that richness in his colors that we see that he has in the majority of his Canadian paintings, right? He somehow now has gotten back to those beautiful pinks and mauves and blues and off-whites that we saw and grayish blues that we saw in the sky in the past, right? He has his body of water. I don't see a person or people in this. This tells you he's just kind of content. Look at his trees. Those trees are fairly young trees. It looks like There's been some decay. There's maybe been a few chopped down, but he's given us all of that information, the smoke in the mountains, right? This is his refuge. This is a place that he goes um, to contemplate life, to feel whole, to feel free. And we see it in this painting. When you look at this painting, it's like, this is a beautiful piece. I want to be there, right? So at this point, it's 1865. Duncanson is an extensive traveler. He depicted, I should say, numerous landscape scenes throughout North Carolina, Pennsylvania, England, Canada, Scotland, and Italy by 1865. So we know 1865 is also the end of the Civil War. This particular painting, again, he's in Canada, and this is called Canadian Falls. This is wonderful. And if you have really paid attention to his waterfalls, you paid attention to his water just being kind of placid, or his water just moving. By 1865, his water is sensational, right? It's sensational. It looks like it has boulders. You can almost hear it. It has different colors. Again, he paints it so that the viewer is inside or very close to the waterfall, right? Look at the colors in the foreground, those beautiful greens, how they move. The water looks like it's moving. The trees, the colors of the trees, everything is a little bit more natural, but he still has that brilliance that we see in the majority of his paintings since he's left the U.S. His travels throughout Italy introduce elements of fantasy and exoticism once more to his mid-career work, just like the influence of the Canadian wilderness on his later paintings, which moved towards greater details and observation of nature. This is a painting he made in Italy, and this is 1865, and I think he vacillates between fantasy, and he did that in his earlier work. His earlier work was fantasy driven. It was work that a lot of his landscapes, they appear to have been landscapes that he copied from brochures and those types of things. And this to me seems very similar. And it could be because the brochures and pictures that he copied them from, and know that they were hand colored, they were from people traveling, right? So to me, it seems as if he has utilized that same kind of fantasy that he did in his earlier paintings, where we see the castle up there, which is small, right? Small. And then we see this kind of interesting light in the middle ground that we've not seen before. We're normally seeing that type of light in the background. He's using a lot of the same devices, right? He has a little bit of land. He has everything in this painting to me. It seems like everything. He has the water hole. He has two different bodies of water. He has, it looks like a man and a woman on some sort of rocky kind of surface. Then there's other people on the other side of rock. There's a castle. He has everything in this. I was going to say except a dog, but then I see a dog in this particular piece. I would say he's happy. He's happy. I'm going to speed up a little bit. This is called Flatboat Men. This is 1865. I'm thinking about 1865. You know, he kind of goes on his trip in a reverse, right? So he doesn't just like show up in the U.S. He goes back through Canada into the U.S. So this, to me, seems as if two things. One of them is that it's a painting that needs to be clean. Two, and you may say, why did she say that? It's because the colors are very similar. There's a certain kind of dinginess to this painting, and I don't think he made that. That has to do with those colors, with sort of a dingy or dust on top of them. But it's an interesting painting in terms of the composition. You know, he's always making little adjustments, right? So we got a little bit of land and we've got a little bit of water in the foreground on the very edge. So again, he puts us on the edge of that water bank. And then there's mountains in the back. They're all similar height. I think that when we're looking at paintings like this, you can kind of say, was he in a rush? Was something happening? Did he have enough paint? Is he painting on the spot? Just a variety of things. The name of this piece is called Loch Long. It's from 1867. This piece has a greater sense of naturalism than his earlier landscapes. It was painted after he returned to Cincinnati in the winter of 1867. He began to create a series of Scottish-influenced landscapes. This is a beautiful, beautiful piece. There is a certain kind of realism in this piece that is just, it's so lovely. It does have this sort of photographic kind of feel to it, right? Especially those mountains that you see to your left. Look at look at the variety in them. Look at the variety of texture and color in those mountains, right? And then of course, look across at the other three hills, right? Those gentle slopes, the colors, how they shift in colors. And then the foreground, again, he uses that similar, I should say, that's not the same device, but they're always similar. He shifts them a little bit, right? There's a body of water. There's land in front of it. It's like you as the viewer are on the land looking at, it looks like there's perhaps a man and a little boy. Looks like he has something in his hand, maybe a pole or something, or a stick or something like that. And he's walking kind of on that diagonal. So there's this wonderful diagonal in this particular painting. And it just kind of, these diagonals just lead you into the background. Look at the sky. Look at the little purplish mauve puffs to the left, and then how that you have that creamy kind of light, and then that light where it lands on the I would say the river, the body of water. This is a beautiful, beautiful painting, and not to say that his other paintings aren't lovely, but they're just some that are just absolutely stunning. Duncanson enjoyed success in Cincinnati and Detroit, where he had previously exhibited. This particular painting is from 1868, so it's a year later, and it's called A Wet Morning on the Chaucer Falls. You can see something's going on here, right? The type of naturalism, the realism that we saw in Loch Long does not exist here. There's something going on with the artist. It's almost as if he has forgotten how to paint, or as if he is painting like he painted in the past. I think his sky is fantastic, though, in this particular painting. It's beautiful, it's talkative, it's moving, there's noise. But his rocks and his water, there's something off here with his composition. When you compare where he was, even in 1862. The name of this painting is called Wilderness. It's from 1868. So while always excitable and talkative, Duncanson suffered increasingly from delusions, hallucinations, and anxiety as the years passed. And you can see it in his paintings. You could see it definitely in The Wet Morning on Chaucer Falls. And then we look at this one, Wilderness, and it's different. It's almost as if he's forgotten how to paint a waterfall. Look at that small waterfall that's kind of in the middle ground, right? He moves back to this fantasy kind of situation. His composition is slightly off to me. After we've had that those incredible diagonals that lead us back, this particular painting, it doesn't really lead our eyes back. If it does, there's like some kind of weird stones right behind the waterfall that doesn't make sense. And then you have these trees that are leading down to the center. Look at the center of the canvas, right? So those trees, they're diagonaling down, but they're going into nowhere. You can't tell if you're up high, and I say that because it looks like a mountain with a sky in the back. So you can't tell if you're on a piece of the land that's high up, right? Or if you are low looking up. There's some kind of weirdness going on with this particular painting. Duncanson traveled through Scotland, exhibiting and making sketches that culminated in a successful landscape paintings. One of them is this particular painting called Dog's Head of Scotland. It's one of 6 Scottish subjects he executed late in his career after he had a trip to England and Scotland around 1870, right? And so I don't have to say any more. You can see that his rock formation is very much like that painting that was found in Ohio. When we look at those kind of craggy kind of rocks to the right, his sky is still nice, but basically what he's showing us is sort of this stormy kind of day, right? Where you have the fishermen, it looks like they're working and moving, but it is a strange composition, right? It is a strange composition. I say that because the majority of this composition has sky and rocks, and the rocks look like they are what we would call stylized. And stylized just simply means you have one kind of form. You look at something and you just repeat it, right? It's just repetitive. It doesn't have anything to do with the nature of the thing. It just is. The name of this painting also is called Veil of Kashmir. This was also painted in 1870. He painted it in the style of luminism, which has a lack of a particular viewpoint, clarity of light, lots of clouds and sky, and a long format. So again, I don't know if he is kind of looking at his past, or if he's looking at some sort of printed material. This is a weird painting. I have to say it's better than the other one, but I would say that he made this painting from some sort of printed material. And you could say, how do you know? I don't know. I'm speculating. But when you look at, for instance, where the sky meets the land, it looks like a separation. It looks like perhaps the stuff in the foreground, the images, the buildings, the boat, the I don't know what that is. It looks like a staircase leading from nowhere, right? All of that looks like it might have been painted from some sort of, again, publication. And then the clouds, the hills, where there's no clouds, really. It's very clear, right? All of that looks like his regular kind of painting. And so it looks like 2 different paintings that have been pushed together. This is called Mountain Pool. Again, this is 1870, and you can just see. I mean, you could just compare this painting to his Blue Hole, and you can see that it has some similarities with the stones in the foreground and the little people. But it's not as interesting and beautiful as the Blue Hole or any other of his paintings. Again, it has that kind of fantasy kind of feel to it. His waterfalls look kind of calm. His composition, instead of having those diagonals, his compositions in the 1870s, they're very vertical, right? It's horizontal. I'm sorry. They're very horizontal. Few angles and horizontal. I'm sorry, this is kind of out of focus. In 1869, Duncanson revisited the upper Mississippi River in Canada, retracing the path he had taken on his earlier trips. This painting is from the final stage of his career. Unlike his earlier picturesque compositions with framed views and receding diagonals, this painting has more of a natural treatment of light and an open-ended composition. I say this all is happening because Duncanson is ill, right? Duncanson is ill. I'm not going to stay here long because his painting is out of focus, but there's enough here that you can see that this is it's a beautiful painting. There's beautiful elements in it. He goes back to his diagonals. I love that water kind of moving around. It has a little bit more of a natural kind of quality to it. The sky is really beautiful, but something is not quite right. The name of this painting is called Vesuvius and Pompeii, 1870. Duncanson becomes mentally ill in 1870. Some speculate that his illness was a result of the lead-based paints that he used as an apprentice house painter. But who knows? This is 1870, so if he did not visit Pompeii, he then painted this from a brochure, because that was very popular at that particular time. He would have saw a brochure in black and white and then would have colored it himself. I'm not sure if he went there or not. I would say that there's elements in here that makes me think that he didn't. Although I don't know if he did, but there's some really fascinating. We have Vesuvius in the back smoking, right? And then look at those Corinthian columns right in front. And then there's some more Corinthian columns over to the side. There's people sitting on some artifacts. And then there's just all kinds of little, again, artifacts all around. It's a really interesting painting. And then think about it for people who weren't able to travel when they saw this particular painting. They've heard of stories, but he's been able to make it come alive. Let's look at one more painting from this period. This is called Pompeii from 1871. So again, I'm not quite sure if he was there. I would say to you, because of the colors, and because of the interesting composition, which is similar to his, but not, again, I would say that because of how this particular painting is looking, that this is a painting that needs to be cleaned. And maybe by now, looking at the second one, you can kind of get my understanding or what I'm talking about, or see what I'm talking about. So from Cincinnati, Duncanson had traveled to Canada. He had traveled to Italy, Scotland, and England. Then he returned to the U.S. Again, he did this all in 1870. So this is after the Civil War. He comes back during the Reconstruction period. October 1872, while hanging a show in Detroit, Duncanson suffered a nervous breakdown. He was hospitalized at the Michigan State Retreat, a sanitarium, and then he died 2 months later, just before Christmas in 1862. So you're looking at some of his last paintings. This is called Ellen Isles Loch Catherine. And again, these paintings, this particular painting, I should say, as well as the other paintings, are based not only on his travels, but on travel brochures. Okay? We see that sort of horizontal kind of situation that he has here. His colors aren't that bright, as we've seen. Beautiful sky, beautiful sun, beautiful hills, right? Beautiful, I'll call it a mountain, right? His water, he has that wonderful reflection of the sun, the light, the shadow in this water. It's a beautiful painting. It's a beautiful painting. This was also made in 1871. This is called Scottish Landscape. And again, we know he went to Scotland. And so perhaps this is based on some sort of watercolors. And you can probably understand from looking at that one watercolor drawing why I would say that, because that tree to the left holding that whole composition up is very similar to his watercolor tree. It's a beautiful tree. And his composition is a little different than we've seen, right? He's pushed, that water is coming a little closer, so there's the water and the land that we see in the foreground. And so by the middle ground, we start to see a certain kind of light. So it's as if we are in the forest, or we're in a situation where there's a lot of trees, and we're looking out from that forest and looking at the light, looking at the sun, looking at the vastness, the beauty of nature. Duncanson was regarded as the best landscape painter in the West. He was renowned in the art world of antebellum America and was an activist in the anti-slavery movement. His work was highly regarded and was purchased by many, including the Queen of England. Today, his works are found in significant museum collections throughout the United States and Scotland. The art historian Kirtner stated that many of Duncanson's paintings carried a thinly veiled message about what it was like to be an African American living in the United States just before and after the Civil War. He said, and I quote, "Just as slave songs held double significance, some of Duncanson's landscape revealed his emotional reaction to and beliefs concerning the struggles of blacks in antebellum America," end of quote. Kirtner also said, and I quote, he said, "Duncanson invested the mainstream American aesthetics with a veiled significance that was understood by the African American community," end of quote. And he said this, I'm thinking, just like this large, calm, serene painting called The Blue Hole or The Floodwaters.